Right about now,
you're about to witness
the Funk Soul Brother.
The Strange Story of Jonathan Small.
Well, hey, everybody. Welcome to the Right About Now podcast. This is Jonathan Small. All right. Well, today we are going to continue my nautical seafaring series. I had no intention, by the way, of doing 2 episodes almost back to back about famous captains of yore, but here we are. Kind of excited about this. It's a good summer type of content, right? Last month, I aired an episode with the esteemed writer Hampton Sides talking about his book that chronicles the life of Captain Cook. And if you haven't heard that one, I advise that you go back and listen. Today, I'm going to delve into the life of a different captain, Captain Kidd. And these guys are very different from each other. Captain Cook was an explorer who was brutally murdered in Hawaii in the 1700s. But Captain Kidd was a pirate. He was one of the most feared pirates ever known, right up there with Blackbeard. He's known for his buried treasures and the Abbott and Costello movie about him in the 1950s. But here is a question. What if Captain Kidd wasn't really a pirate at all? What if he was actually a respected sea captain and a loyal colonial privateer who just got mixed up with the wrong people? Well, my guest today has a personal stake in the story of Captain Kidd and finding out the truth. His name is Samuel Marquis, and he happens to be the 9th great-grandson of Captain Kidd. And he's chronicled his exploration of his great-great-great-great-great-great-grandfather in his new book, Captain Kidd, A Story of Treasure and Betrayal. The book is deeply researched. It's filled with footnotes and investigation. And he is really trying to challenge this myth that his great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was a pirate. So in this interview, we talk about what he uncovered while writing the book. Talk about Kidd's early life, his mission to the Indian Ocean, his surprisingly egalitarian values for somebody who's considered a pirate, and the forces that turned him from a once war hero to an outlaw. And we also discuss Captain Kidd's relationship with his wife, Sarah, and the real story behind this so-called buried treasure. Lots of great stuff in here. So sit back and enjoy the story of Captain Kidd. Samuel Marquis, welcome to the Right About Now podcast.
Thanks for having me.
So great to have you, and really excited to talk about this incredible story and the fact that you were related to the infamous Captain William Kidd. Like, what an interesting relative to have. Do you remember the first time you found out that this was your great grandfather? I think 9 times removed.
Yeah, I mean, I've known since I was a little kid. Of course, there's so much mythology with Captain Kidd. Mm-hmm. Because he's the guy who sort of started the whole trend of buried treasure. Was really him. And there were others who kind of actually did it, but it was a short-term thing. And so I've known since I was a little kid, and the stories I heard were always, he was notorious. He was swashbuckling. He was like an Errol Flynn character, which when I came to write the book, I discovered is not really who he was, Right. He was just a colonial American sea captain and New Yorker, and really tried hard to be an upstanding, law-abiding guy, basically.
Yeah. So you are, we should find out a little bit about you and who you are. So you have a lot of hyphenates in kind of what you do for a living. Tell us a little bit about, what your career is, what you've done prior to this, and then what kind of led you to decide to embark on this project.
Yeah, I'm actually a principal hydrogeologist, so I study groundwater contamination.
Wow.
And sort of clean up hazardous waste sites and do groundwater modeling and expert witness work kind of testifying against, sort of corporate polluters,
Good.
for large scale sites. So I basically do hydrogeology, groundwater cleanup, but I also write books. So I'm an author slash scientist, which
Yeah.
is kind of an odd combination, but that's what I am.
Now, when did you decide to start writing books? Was that kind of later in your career? Or have you kind of always done them side by side, the two careers?
I always loved writing. I took like 4 English classes in college. I wrote a lot of papers to get extra credit when I was, to catch up on, when like, oh God, I want to get I'm in an A minus or a B plus, A minus, push over the top. So I always loved to write since I was, a little kid, or at least in high school for sure. And so I've always liked to tell stories, and I've always been very interested in history. So American history and international history. So it was a natural fit to just write books. And so I kind of started, around, I don't know, 15 years ago or so.
Yeah.
And, I've published now. This will be my 12th book. So
that's amazing. For all those listening who haven't published one book, 12. That's very impressive. So when you decide to focus on a topic, what makes it go from just, oh, this will be a great idea, to actually being like, I'm going to make this into a book, and I'm going to spend my next year or 2 years researching this and making it into a book?
Well, the unique thing is this is my first nonfiction book. Okay. And I realized, so this has 90 pages of footnotes and bibliography. And that's where my scientific background comes in handy, because I do research. I've published like 25 papers in peer-reviewed journals, boring scientific, environmental geology kind of stuff. And so I've always written a lot, whether it was technical or, books. So this is my first nonfiction book, and this is what I'm going to do from now on, because I'm actually realized I should have been doing this all along. I kind of started out with environmental thrillers because that's what I knew, because I was a hydrogeologist in groundwater. So they're all like, hazardous waste polluters. And I had my character was a Native American, Joe Heigl, because I have a connection to the Cheyenne through Thomas B. Marquis, who's an Indian rights activist and started the Little Bighorn Society as a pro-Native American guy. He was an Indian rights activist, spoken Indian Sign Language. And who's he buried next to? George Armstrong Custer at the Little Bighorn. Oh, but he was an Indian rights activist who lived 40, 50 years after Custer.
Wow.
So
now you caught the nonfiction bug. What is it that now has made you decide that that's what you want to do in the future?
Well, that's an interesting thing, because what really happened is I started out with environmental thrillers, and then I kind of did some espionage. And then I went just basically, they're pure history books. They're historical fiction. But I pick every scene, like, for instance, Pope Pius, General Patton, these African-American tankers. And I just, recreate with multiple point of view characters, historical fiction. But as the reviewers say, it's very historically accurate, or, kind of where the scenes are based on exact events that actually occurred. And I have, journals and notes and memoirs for primary sources. So they're really, my last 5 books are basically history books. Yeah. Where the only liberties I take is when they're with their lover, or like Patton's with an aide, his driver, Yep. And I want to sort of emphasize the softer side of Patton, for instance, or even Pope Pius with one of his aides, or, whatever. So they're really pretty historically accurate for my last 5 books. So this is just another step further, because it's got 90 pages of endnotes and very detailed bibliography, because it's really a scholarly work first and foremost. Yeah. So it was a natural transition. I basically slowly evolved and transitioned into it, is how I did it. And now
you're like, I don't have to, like, it's all there, and I don't have to, like, make up characters and make up dialogue, right? Because it's more historical. Is that kind of what appeals to you?
It's exactly, I mean, you're following exactly what someone is reported to have said. And you're footnoting at every, I have, I don't know, I can't remember if it's like, over 2,500 or maybe.
Yeah, I saw your footnote. I think it was 90 pages of footnotes. I saw it. I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, so it's pretty detailed. I'm trying to be accurate, but I realized I kind of wish I had maybe transitioned to this sooner, because I wasn't sure I could do a full book and footnote to this level, but really it was a natural fit.
Well, hey, friends, the warm weather is here. So exciting. And that means lots more time for outdoor activities, renewed energy, and just a great time to refresh your wellness routine with a great tasting daily health drink. And for me, that drink is AG1. And how much do I love AG1? Well, let me count the ways right here. First of all, it tastes really good. Very important for me. It doesn't just taste like I'm biting into a bunch of vegetables. It actually has a wonderful, refreshing, almost sweet taste, although there's no sugar in it. It helps with my digestion for sure. My energy levels seem to be pretty high when I'm on AG1, and my skin seems to be a lot clearer. If that's not enough for you, I don't know what is. So if you're looking for a really good, delicious, healthy drink, AG1 is offering my new subscribers a free $76 gift when you sign up. You'll get a welcome kit, a bottle of D3K2, and 5 free travel packs, which are really handy when you're going on vacation, especially in a nutrition desert where there's just not a lot of healthy food. So make sure to check out drinkag1.com/rightaboutnow. That's drinkag1.com/rightaboutnow and get that special deal. All right, back to the podcast. So your first one you chose to do was about your ancestor, William Kidd. Did you ever consider doing a historical fiction about him, considering your relationship to him?
That's a great question, because what really happened is I started to write the book just like my 5 historical fiction books that are World War II, and then I did one on Blackbeard. And then basically I was over halfway through. I think I was about 2/3. And I said, what am I doing? I got to write the best book on Captain Kidd.
Right.
He's my 9th great grandfather. What am I doing?
Right.
And so then I had to go restart. Well, a lot of the scenes were, because I was already very factual based. I didn't have to change. I had kind of like half of it was ready to go, but I needed to go back and get all the footnotes and endnotes and, have a detailed. So the skeleton of it was already there, and then I had to go back and make it nonfiction. So I already started it as historical fiction, and then I said, oh, I got to make it, go back and make this a history book, but narrative nonfiction style,
So let's talk about, who first broad strokes, who Captain Kidd was, and I want to get into like specifics that you discovered as you did your extensive research. But just on the basic 35,000 foot view, who was Captain Kidd? I know he was born in Scotland, but he grew up in colonial America. Talk about a little bit about who he was, like who he really was.
Yeah, so Captain Kidd, was born in 1654. His family roots are actually in England. So
okay.
England,
I thought it was Scotland. Okay.
But he went to Scotland very early.
Got it.
And so, so he kind of like, my wife was born in Evanston, Illinois, but she moved to Hampshire so young.
Right.
She doesn't say, where are you from? She doesn't say Evanston, Illinois. She's from Hanover, New Hampshire, where Dartmouth College is. So Kidd is a similar situation based on DNA evidence. Dr. David Boyles, who's an emeritus professor at the South Dakota School of Mines, has kind of reconstructed and he's still closely connected to Scotland because he went there at such a young age. That's where he became a seafarer. So he was born in 1654. He went to the sea pretty early. We don't know exactly, but most people think he was a cabin boy or an apprentice of some kind at an early age. By his early teens, probably even earlier. And so he went to the Caribbean at an early age and was working. He worked as probably, kind of a little cabin boy at first, at merchant ships. He probably started off on merchant ships, but then at some point it became a buccaneer. But the buccaneers, of course, were not pirates. They were licensed.
The difference between a buccaneer and a pirate. I think people.
They were licensed privateers who were, instead of taking the ships of all nations and seizing them like a pirate would indiscriminately pillage any ship, they were clearly focused on only attacking the ships of Spain and maybe to a more limited extent Portugal. So the buccaneers were, they started as the buccaneers, who were kind of French, on the island of Hispaniola, which is modern day Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And they started off there, and they pretty much attacked. At first, they just started to attack ships, and they kind of lived on the island, kind of a little roguish empire. And then at some point in 1655, the British took took Jamaica away from Spain, who didn't have enough, population to protect it. So it became an English possession in 1655. And that's when the original Buccaneers transitioned to become the Buccaneers that we know that are more English heavy in the 1650s. And then they kind of took up a base on the wickedest city on earth was on the island of Jamaica. The Port Royal, Jamaica was the wickedest city on earth, where all the, and everyone calls them pirates. Were they pirate-like? Yeah, but technically they were really selective, attacking Spain. And, all seamen are a little bit roguish and a little bit wild, but they always were fighters and drinkers and hellions.
But they were working for the English government, right?
They were, most of them had, lawful licenses, but a lot had sort of flimsy licenses that might be from an assistant governor or even a customs collector or whatever, sort of lower level, a mayor. They were definitely roguish, but I think we want to be careful about calling them pirates, because pirates is a label that's thrown around a lot, but there's a lot of variations on pirates.
So Captain Kidd was doing this at this stage. I guess he wasn't a captain, or did he become a captain eventually? Like first he was just kind of working as a, like in his 20s, right? He was kind of working as a privateer, buccaneer. When did he kind of elevate through the ranks, and where did he end up?
He was basically a seaman that worked his way up, and he didn't become a captain until he was 34 years old. And it's kind of the opening scene of my opening couple chapters of my book is where I start, because we don't know a lot about him before that, so that's when he enters the historical record as Captain Kidd. And he makes a big splash. I mean, he's everywhere,
so to speak.
He's kind of like Zelig or, the Tom Hanks character. He's everywhere. He knew like 7 colonial governors and assistant governors, and he's hobnobbing with the rich and famous, but he's kind of this handsome rogue of New York. He bought real estate early too. By 1688, he was buying real estate, prime real estate that would be worth over $1 billion today.
Yeah, so he was wealthy and kind of a playboy, although we're going to talk about his relationship. Very handsome. But, of course, his reputation is that he's kind of a bad guy, kind of probably a little bit narcissistic. But did you find, how would you characterize his personality?
Well, I think early on he was, so in this, basically, as you say, he was a buccaneer and probably a merchant sailor too. Mm-hmm. Sailing, you did both. Sailors back then might be a pirate one day, they might be a privateer the next, and they might be a merchant seaman after that. And then they might be impressed in the Royal Navy for 2 years and not get back home. So seafarers, we tend to, it's sort of a modern construct to make this big separation between privateers and pirates and merchant seamen. That was less prevalent back then because people would go back and forth between them, and there wasn't a rigid line between outlaw pirates and licensed privateers and merchant seamen. So early on, he was a buccaneer and merchant seaman. So he probably worked his way up to become an officer by the 1680s. Certainly by the time my book comes in at 1689, he was a first mate or high ranking. But initially, in this case, he was aboard a French ship attacking the Dutch. So sometimes your allegiance also didn't just go to your country either. You might be, if you were a sailor fighting against the Dutch with France, especially the Buccaneers, because they were generally English, French, and Dutch for the most part, and native too. They had natives.
I'm trying to think if there's any kind of modern day equivalent to what he was doing now. Like he's like a real estate tycoon, but he's also this, basically a Navy. I mean, is there any equivalent now? It seems so kind of glamorous in a way back then.
That's a good question, really. I think, I don't want to give my story away. That Kidd was the perfect angel because, he was totally hanging out with pirates. They were called the Red Sea Men in the 1690s. Right. And he was hanging out, but he was really a stickler about being a licensed privateer. He was really set on always have been licensed, and it really bothered him not to be. So he was kind of a law-abiding, I call him the Buccaneer Boy Scout in my book. he tried really hard to not be the most famous pirate of all time, but he ended up failing,
Yeah,
because
that's
him and
interesting.
Blackbeard are number 1 and 2. And it used to be Kidd was more famous than Blackbeard. Blackbeard's made a comeback because I wrote a book about Blackbeard too.
Yeah.
In the last decade, with Pirates of the Caribbean featured him, of course they made him a maniac, which he wasn't. But Captain Kidd was really even a lot more law-abiding. Blackbeard was at least a real pirate,
Yeah.
But even he was selective. He only took he didn't want to take British ships, and he only did it, by like 1717. He kind of delayed for a couple of years. So,
Now, we talked a little bit. You talk in the book about his relationship with Sarah, who is his wife. What did you learn about Sarah and that relationship in your research that you can reveal here?
I think Sarah, the interesting thing about Sarah is that Captain Kidd knew her by 1688. That's when he settled in New York City. He must have been making merchant runs by then and not just buccaneering. But New York became the biggest pirate stronghold in the 1690s.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So pirates, swaggering pirates walking down the street.
I thought it was Pittsburgh anyway.
yeah.
Right.
But they were technically they were privateers because they would get licenses in the 1690s from the governor, Benjamin Fletcher, and other governors. And basically, instead of going and fighting the French in Canada, because this was during King William's War, was from 1689 to 1697. So throughout most of the period of my book, we were, in King William's War, which was the English and the Dutch against the French. Because King William was Dutch and he married to become the King of England at that time. So basically, there were a lot of privateers who were really pirates in New York who would get a license, and instead of going to fight the French in Canada, they went to the Indian Ocean for those treasure ships. These are the most richest, wealthiest ships of all time, besides the Spanish galleons. So
those treasure ships. So that can't be legal, what he was doing, just kind of going after treasure ships, right? I mean, this is he's a thief, right?
Well, no, Captain Kidd never went after the treasure ships per se. He entered into an arrangement that he tried to get out of that involved the King of England and 4 of the most wealthiest noble Whig lords. So the Whig party was in power by then over the Tories. And these guys were, the Lord Chancellor Somers, the Duke of Shrewsbury, then an admiral, were 4 of, very wealthy top Whigs. And the king was involved. And Captain Kidd was hired as a pirate hunter to go hunt down pirates in the Indian Ocean. But of course, he had a crew that thought otherwise.
Exactly. So what is the real story behind, he's famous for the buried treasure, right? Treasure Island, buried treasure. Are you able to reveal, without giving too much away, is that really a thing? Did he really bury a treasure? Tell me.
Yes,
I can. Tell me what you can tell me.
I can tell you enough to know that all the rumors is people are still today fanatically looking for his buried treasure all over the world. Right. I mean, they're looking in the South China Sea. They're looking all over Madagascar. They found 2 of Kidd's ships, and there's not buried treasure has not been found. I mean, they definitely found 1 ship. I guess one is the one that was found in Madagascar is not his, apparently. But the one that was found off the coast of Hispaniola, which is modern day Dominican Republic, they found that ship and they didn't find his treasure. So he went to the Indian Ocean, his expedition, to hunt down pirates and to fight the French, because he was a privateer. He had 2 privateering licenses or commissions. So one was to fight the French because he was a privateer fighting in King William's War, but he also had a license to go hunt down pirates. Now the king got a 10% cut. So the king knew that this was a shady deal. Right. King William's no noble guy in this, and neither are the Whig lords, the Duke of Shrewsbury and these other players who got Kidd involved. The Lord Belmont, who became the governor of New York and Massachusetts Bay and New Hampshire, was also involved in the enterprise. And he's the one who threatened Kidd. Kidd tried to get out of it. Captain Kidd did not want to go hunt down pirates at all because he knew it would be a recipe for disaster. He tried to get out of it. It's a well-established fact, and I emphasize it in my book because some people play that down.
Mm-hmm.
And what happened is, obviously went on a voyage. By then, it was called the Red Sea explosion, or the Red Sea trade, was basically sailors. I'm going to call them sailors and not use the term pirates yet. Would sail from New York and Newport in particular, and a lot came from Boston. They would come from Philadelphia, Charleston, all the big seafaring port towns. But licenses were New York and Newport were the top, and these ships would go get a legal license to fight the French in Canada, but they would never go to Canada. They'd go straight to the Indian Ocean, and they would go try and get the Great Mughal of India, his treasure fleets that were doing the Hajj, going to Mecca to pray, and these ships would go, and they were outrageously, had all kinds of goods aboard because it was a trading and a religious mission. And so they'd go trade in Mecca and the port towns of Arabia, and then come back to India with all these gold and silver and a lot of other things. So they'd bring sort of Indian things from India to Arabia, and they'd get kind of what Arabia had, which was a lot of gold and silver and some other things, frankincense and myrrh and these other things that were very valuable back then. And so these treasure fleets would be worth anywhere from $20 million to $200 million. Mm-hmm. So you'd have these ships full of generally 100 to 150 sailors. We call them sailors till they actually go and take these treasure fleets, and then they'd go wait at the what was called the Gateway of Tears. They called them the Babs, but it's the Strait al Mandab, I think, is how it's pronounced. But basically, it's the entrance to the Red Sea. And they would just wait there for these treasure ships to go, and then they'd attack them as they were going to India. But the ships would spread out, and they were well armed. They'd have 500 soldiers aboard, with scimitars and weapons. And so some of these would be just like Hollywood blockbuster Errol Flynn-like battles. They were pretty awesome. So Captain Kidd, he waited at the Babs, but he was there to hunt down the pirates as they were fleecing the treasure ships.
Right.
So that's
he was arrested.
Later, he followed in the footsteps of a real pirate, English pirate named Henry Avery, and also Thomas Tew, who was a Rhode Island gentleman who got a license from the governor of New York, Benjamin Fletcher, and sailed to the Indian Ocean. And those two guys and others created the Red Sea explosion. Right. It started around 1693 was kind of when it really took off. 1693, 1694. 95 and 96, that's when guys were just, going from Newport and New York mostly, but other ports too, and sailing to the Indian Ocean and pillaging these ships. And then they go to Madagascar, St. Mary's Island off the northeastern coast of Madagascar. And they kind of created a republic of pirates on St. Mary's Island. So Captain Kidd, though, his journey didn't start till 1696.
Yeah.
So he left in September 1696. By then, the Red Sea guys who were right before him were Thomas Tew and Henry Avery. And they rampaged and got ships. These ships are worth, $150 million type ships. And so they hit it big. And there were a bunch of other captains. They weren't the only ones. So Kidd appeared at the wrong place at the wrong time to hunt down pirates, because he immediately, when he was getting near the coast of Cape Town in southern Africa, he was pretty much about a 2-week sail from there when a Royal Navy ship captain tried to impress his seamen. He wanted 40 to 50 of Kidd's crewmen, and Kidd evaded him. He escaped during the night because he had his ship, the Adventure Galley, was equipped with oars. Yeah. So he escaped. There was no wind. It was a windless night, and he escaped. And this Royal Navy guy was really incensed about it, and basically badmouthed him after that. There was also an East India Company guy in the fleet of this Royal Navy Commodore.
They made him out to be the bad guy when it's really these two other guys that are the real pirates.
Yeah, they basically said that he was a pirate because he tried to escape having his crew impressed by the Royal Navy.
Wow.
So
he's put on. So he goes from being this celebrity, buccaneer to being a man on trial, right? He basically scapegoated. And tell us a little bit about this trial that he's put on.
Okay, so he leaves New York in September 1696. He goes all the way into the Indian Ocean, and he does take ships.
Mm-hmm.
He does take the Quedagh Merchant, and he does take the Ruparel, which is both of the captains of those ships presented French passports or papers documenting that they were French, and that's all that mattered for taking a ship. So he was fully legal within his legal rights, 100% to capture these. He did capture ships that were worth a lot of money. One of them, the Quedagh Merchant was worth, might have been upwards of like a $60 million ship. Yeah. It wasn't as big as the Avery and the others took, but it was substantial. But he took it legally. The problem is all these other guys that come before him, everyone just kind of labeled him as a pirate. His name was catchy, Captain Kidd.
Good alliteration. Yep.
Yeah, good alliteration. There was a lot of little things that conspired. He did take the vessels, but he took them lawfully. And so by then, no one wanted his backers, his royal sponsors, and the King of England wanted nothing to do with him. So by the time he came back, and then his crew mutinied. 97 of his crew mutinied from him because he refused to turn to piracy.
Wow.
They wanted to just turn pirate on St. Mary's Island because he had to go to St. Mary's to outfit his ship to make the journey back. Well, he lost 97 crewmen, so he couldn't go. So he had to wait 5 months at least before he could go. And he cobbled together a crew of maybe 20 to 25 guys to get back to the Caribbean. And then from there, he came back to New York. By the time he got to the Caribbean in 1698, he was a wanted man. And so was his crew.
And so what ends up happening to him? What is his fate? He also gets, aside from going to trial, his name gets smeared, which is probably why his name was so long associated with walking the plank and kind of like an evil pirate, like the bad pirate rap, right?
Well, I think that what happened is that just for whatever reason, Kidd just had unbelievably bad luck on his voyage too. It was a disaster. One of the books I've read recently is David Grann's The Wager.
Yeah, David Grann is a college friend and has been on this show numerous times. Just to give David Grann a
Oh, that's great. His book's a great book. So it has,
and it reminds me a little bit of your book because it's the same. He goes back to trial and the same of a similar story.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarity. His time period is a little different because it's the War of Jenkins' Ear, I think. So it's, he's more like 1735, 1740-ish.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm in the 1690s, the Red Sea explosion.
Right.
Where basically colonial America, there were no banks then. People don't understand that piracy was widely accepted in colonial America in Captain Kidd's time in the 1690s. People were like, oh, so we're going to go stick it to the infidels in the Indian Ocean, take their money and bring it back. They're godless heathens and they're not Protestants. They're not upstanding English Protestants. And, that's the attitude. Everyone had that attitude. So most people didn't enforce the Crown's anti-piracy laws or the Navigation Acts in the 1690s. And then there was a kind of a crackdown that came later, towards the end of the 1690s. And that Kidd was caught up in that. His timing was bad too, because he came late. So in any case, when he came back to America, that's when he started to bury his treasure on Gardiner's Island, and he doled it out to friends. In Rhode Island, he had a friend, Thomas Paine, who was a ship captain, who was an old buccaneer friend of his, who at Trinity Church, he's commemorated in a plaque at Trinity Church in Rhode Island. He had another friend that was a really good, and Thomas Clark in New York was his good friend, who was a ship captain. He took a lot of his treasure and stuff and hid it in Connecticut, in Stamford, Connecticut. So he had all these, had friends all over the place. Captain Kidd was very popular. He had friends in New York. He had friends all along the New England coast. He was well known in Boston and New York because he was a gentleman. He came back. He was a war hero.
Right.
So he became a war hero in basically 1691 when he fought Jacob Leisler, who was kind of the usurper of New York. He became the governor by kind of taking power, seizing power, really. and he became very unpopular. So Kidd played a huge role in taking him down and became a war hero in 1691.
Right.
So that's where he kind of established all these contacts from between 1688 and 1696. He was a privateer, but he was also a merchant captain, making runs to the West Indies, and he made some good money there too.
But why did he have a bad reputation? I mean,
well, he got the reputation after all this. He came back to America. He reached out with his lawyer, James Emmott, in New York City, and his wife, Sarah. So his wife is awesome. Mm-hmm. Sarah's a strong woman, strong American woman who stood by her man as much as anybody ever in the history of America. So he immediately came back to Long Island Sound. He contacted a judge and a lawyer, the prominent judge and lawyer right outside on Long Island, northern Long Island, in Oyster Bay. Mm-hmm. They set up a messenger who took the Brooklyn ferry to New York City. They went right to Kidd's lawyer, James Emmott, and then his wife, Sarah, and said, Sarah, pack your things, get your daughters, and you're going to go. Captain Kidd's going to meet you in a week. And Thomas Clark, who's the sea captain I mentioned previously, who helped build Trinity Church. Captain Kidd played a huge role in building Trinity Church. It's still, the latest incarnations in New York today. Mm. And so he got his wife and lawyer, and they met him. The lawyer met him right away and went to Boston to meet with Lord Belmont, who by then was the governor of New York, Massachusetts Bay, and New Hampshire. But he was in Boston. He had been to New York for a year. When Kidd got back, by the time Kidd got back in 1698, the spring of 1698, Lord Belmont was in Boston. So Kidd's lawyer, James Emmott, Kidd dropped him off in Rhode Island, and he had to ride a horse for like 70 miles to Boston. Mm-hmm. He got there in like 36 hours. Went to meet with Belmont to strike a deal. Captain Kidd's innocent. He's got French passports that show he's innocent. And he tried to strike a deal. So Kidd was waiting for him in Long Island Sound. James Emmott came back and met with Captain Kidd off Rhode Island. And then Lord Belmont sent a go-between, Duncan Campbell, a Scottish deputy postmaster in Boston. And so he was kind of the go-between because Belmont knew him and Kidd knew him. And he was a postmaster like Ben Franklin.
Yeah.
He was the assistant postmaster of Boston. And so, he started the Boston Newsletter, the first real newspaper, in colonial America. So he's an important guy. Kidd was not feeling warm and fuzzy with Belmont's wording. And a lot of that was Sarah. Sarah kind of didn't like the language. They looked over the letter. So he sent Duncan Campbell back I need a complete guarantee of a pardon because I'm innocent. And he had like 10 of his original crew. That's all he had left. Plus he had 10 or 15 new guys. Mm-hmm. A couple of them were real rogues who were real pirates, but they were interesting guys. And so he did have kind of a mixed crew at that point, but he pretty much was an innocent guy at that point. He had taken 2 things with legal passes. He might have looked away because at that point he had 3 ships in the Indian Ocean in late 1697 and 1698. So the worst crime he committed was he did kill his gunner, who was a mutineer, though, which back then really wouldn't be a crime. So he might have been guilty of manslaughter. That's questionable, though. And according to his age, he wouldn't have. He hit him with a bucket. They got into a fight because the other guy was a mutineer. His gunner, it was his chief gunner, William Moore. And so he did that, but he also looked away or didn't intervene when his crew at that point was sailing in 3 ships, and he put all the rogues aboard one of the the prizes, one of the captured ships. Those guys took a Portuguese ship, and they definitely committed piracy. Captain Kidd didn't take that ship, but he either looked the other way. At that point, his crew was very mutinous, and he couldn't control them. So the worst crime he's guilty of is he either looked the other way or might have even allowed another ship to commit the crime.
Right.
So is he guilty? It's questionable. It's very questionable. It's not as certain as some historians have attempted to make it, is what I've discovered.
Right. But the newspapers said he was guilty. And so at the time he was considered to be a guilty. Right. And there was
Well, what happened is
propaganda against him.
when he came back, Lord Belmont, gave him a flimsy pardon. And once he came into town with all his treasure, all Belmont wanted was the treasure.
Yeah.
Because he was in debt. He was in serious debt. I mean, he literally owed like $1 million worth of debt as the governor, because he had a wife who was, spent money like I say, like a drunken sailor in the book,
Right.
And so she, and Belmont, was way overextended. So he was trying to get all the stuff. He sort of strung Kid along. He invited him into Boston. He kind of lured him into Boston, we should say. And then once Kid was there for like 5 days, he had him arrested, because there was too much pressure. He pretty much kind of had to arrest him if he was going to get exonerated and exonerate the wealthy backers in London and get the king. You don't want to cross the king, right?
Right.
So the wealthy investors in London, Belmont was protecting them and himself, and he wanted to get his hands on the treasure. So he was looking at all kinds of crap. If anyone's evil in the whole Captain Kidd story, it's Lord Belmont.
Bad guy.
Yeah, he's trying to keep all the treasure because under Admiralty law, he could keep a third for himself if he just arrested Kidd. But he had an agreement signed with Kidd. Remember, Kidd has signed an agreement with Lord Belmont, and the king has issued commissions, and the Duke of Shrewsbury, and these other high-ranking Whigs in London are all going to be brought down by a big scandal. Captain Kidd was the biggest scandal of the late 17th century, early 18th century. This is a big deal. Mobs followed him all over London whenever he went before the House of Commons or in his trial. So this was a big deal. So Belmont had to kind of weasel out of it and but he had to get all of Kidd's treasure. So that's when Captain Kidd became, no one wanted. He went from being one of the most popular guys in the colonies to, oh man, he's untouchable. He'll bring me all down,
Wow. So what ultimately was his fate?
Well, that's sort of giving the story away. But
all right, don't give the story away.
Know a lot of it. Well, he had to go to trial in 17. He was shipped to London in March of 1700, but his trial didn't take place for more than a year. And he went before the House of Commons and made his case, but he didn't turn on his sponsors. See, one of the things about Kidd is how honorable he was.
Loyal, yeah.
When he was in prison, he looked after, children that were incarcerated. He looked after seamen's wives to try and get them money because the crown confiscated all of everything that he had taken on his journey, that a lot of it was lawfully obtained. And people who had died were owed shares, because if you're owed, your spouse got it. Well, the crown just took everything. So the English crown, they're not the good guys in this either. They took all the money. A lot of it was lawful that should have gone to the wives of these seamen. Well, these poor wives are bankrupt. And back then they'd they put you in debtor's prison. They had no mercy. There was no, So Captain Kidd went to England, and then he was tried. And,
you have to read the book.
There, it wasn't good. Let's put it that way.
You have to read the book to find out his ultimate fate. So people might read this book. I'm going to play devil's advocate here and say, well, your relations and he's family. So of course you're going to put a little bit of a positive spin on his legacy and his story. What do you say to that potential criticism that I'm sure you'll probably get because let's face it, the internet's filled with trolls that are going to probably say that about you. What do you say to that?
Well, here's the thing is my background is important because I'm a scientist who's been a scientist for most of his career. I have a master's in geology. I'm a registered professional geologist in like 12 states, which is not an easy thing to do. I'm first and foremost very factual based. Everyone says it in my other books, even when they're historical fiction. So I don't do anything. Captain Kidd does have a divided. Some people are like, oh, he was just a pirate. But they're wrong. Okay. They're flat. And I'll go up against anyone and argue that my story is as accurate a story, if not the most accurate story on Captain Kidd, because I didn't go home. I did see his positive characteristics, and I do bring those out, but a lot of people have done it previously too. Yeah. So there's been a number of people who have written books, that are everyone's sympathetic about his trial. Yeah. So I think I can go and say that during his trial, the English crown hid his French passports, okay, or actually just stashed them away in the wrong file room, because they were found in 1910 by an American historian who found the French passports. At his trial, they denied that they even existed.
Yeah, it was rigged. It was framed. Yeah,
and they rigged, and they tried him also for murder, premeditated murder, for striking a mutinous gunner with a wooden bucket. I don't know about premeditated murder by wooden bucket. That's one of my chapter headings. Come on. If you're going to commit a murder, I don't think you're premeditated with a wooden bucket.
Yeah, maybe not the best idea.
So I think the answer to your question is no. I tried to be really fair. I'm sympathetic, but I'm hard on him too, because he was politically naive, and I say it in my conclusions. He was politically naive. He was a hard taskmaster. Like sometimes he was a dry, General Patton aboard the ship. He was tough. So sometimes he was probably a little too tough. So he had his character flaws. There's no question. I'm fair about those, but I do give him a fair shake, and that's, I think, what makes my book different. Other people have done it too, but I think what I've done is synthesize kind of everyone's interpretation. And the book was endorsed by Robert Ritchie, and he's the preeminent Kidd scholar in the world. And he has a different interpretation of Captain Kidd, but he did endorse my book because I think he understands that there is a scholarly work. Yeah, and that I try and be fair, but I do give him a fair shake, and I think he deserves that. I think he's been unfairly maligned and labeled to the point where you got to swing a little bit back the other way, in fairness.
Yeah. So, now, has Hollywood come calling since you've put this book out, or it's not out yet? At the taping of this, it isn't out. But are you any interest from screenwriters or television people, or because it's such a great story and it's your family story, really? I mean, I don't know who owns the rights to Captain Kidd. It's probably public domain at this point. But
yeah, I better file that. No,
yeah, exactly.
I get a Captain Kidd logo, and
yeah, exactly. Well, okay. So what's next for you? Any other people you're looking at now to profile or to write biographies on?
My new books, I kind of have two in progress, but one I've finished and the other one's part of the way in. And I don't want to describe that one because it's a great idea and I don't want anybody to steal it. So I'll tell you about the one that's done.
Tell me about that.
Basically, I have kind of somewhat of a sequel to this book that my agent and I are finalizing now, that basically takes the 1690s in New York from a different perspective of other characters. Because I had so much material from researching this book. And New York in the 1690s is such a
fascinating,
awesome idea. It's just amazing that the pirates and Iroquois. So this new book is sort of like Last the Mohicans meets Pirates of the Caribbean meets Gangs of New York. That's what I call it.
This is right up my alley. I'm fascinated with
all three of those.
History. Yeah, I am fascinated with Gotham. I love that book, Gotham. I love New York history. I'm from New York, so originally I'm a New Yorker. So you had me at Iroquois and and Gangs of New York. All right. Well, the book is called Captain Kidd. I don't have the subtitle in front of me here.
A Tale of Treasure, a true story of treasure and betrayal.
Great title. Pick it up. Samuel Marquis, thank you so much for taking the time to share this story with us and to share your journey with us. And
well, thanks for having me, Jonathan. It was great, and I appreciate it.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Right About Now podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you would like to find out more about the podcast, go to rightaboutnowmedia.com. I also love to hear from my listeners. If you want to reach out to me, reach out at jonathan@rightaboutnowmedia.com. And hey, if you haven't seen what I'm doing over on Substack, check out Small Talk. That is my Substack channel, and we are focusing on lots of issues that pertain to Generation X, whether it's where we are in our lives right now, financial and professional concerns, or just looking back at an era that we grew up in and love and remember. And it's a little bit of a nostalgic trip into the past. Right now, I have a episode up about the best music videos of the 1980s. So check that out. Until we meet again, this is John Small encouraging you to do the right thing.